Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. On today's episode, we will look at democracy. What is democracy? What does democracy look like? Is democracy the best type of government? Thinking in a foreign language is a vital step on the road to fluency. And this podcast aims to help you achieve this by discussing various topics, ranging from current events to science, philosophy, economics, and much more. Thinking in English is now on Instagram. Yes, you heard that right, Instagram. If you have Instagram, please go into the description of the podcast and give us a follow, or simply search Thinking in English Pod on Instagram. If you don't have Instagram, why not make an account and make me your first follow? I'm sure the content will be worth it. I'll be producing regular English vocabulary, grammar, and other types of English learning content, maybe some idioms and phrasal verbs as well, over the next few weeks. And if enough people engage with the content, I'll continue making it into the future. All transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog as well. The vocabulary lists, comprehension questions, and articles are all there for you to read. The link is in the description, so please check it out. And now, here is today's vocabulary. As always, the written list is in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Under the spotlight. Under the spotlight. If someone or something is under the spotlight, they are thoroughly examined, especially by journalists and the public. For example, the new tax law has put his earnings under the spotlight. Ultimate. Ultimate. Ultimate means most important. For example, my managers will make the ultimate decision about who to employ. Feasible. Feasible. Able to be made, done, or achieved. For example, with some extra resources, the project will be feasible. Contemporary. Contemporary. Existing or happening now. For example, I don't like contemporary art. To govern. To govern. To control or direct the public business of a country, city, group of people, etc. For example, the country is governed by a military regime. Assembly. Assembly. The process of coming together, or the state of being together. For example, the Constitution protects the freedom of assembly. To incorporate. To incorporate. To include something as part of something larger. For example, this car incorporates several new safety features. Judicial. Judicial. Relating to or done by courts or judges or the legal system. For example, the Supreme Court is the judicial branch of the government. Consolidated. Consolidated. Made stronger and more certain. For example, his power was consolidated after his re-election. And finally, legitimacy. Legitimacy. The quality of being legal, reasonable, and acceptable. For example, the lawyers expressed serious doubts about the legitimacy of military action. Democracy has been under the spotlight in recent days, following the US election. This week, I've read article after article and watched TV news report after news report, focusing on the challenges currently facing the USA. In fact, a recent article from The Guardian describes US democracy as broken and badly designed. Rather than looking at the US election results in today's episode, I want to focus on the idea of democracy. What is democracy? What does democracy look like? How do we measure democracy? Democracy is such a common term in the modern world. My old political science textbook from my first year as a university student talked about how the world was the most democratic it had ever been. Towards the end of the 20th century, democracy spread from its homeland in Western Europe and North America to more of Asia, Southern and Eastern Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa. However, a lot has changed since I was a first-year undergraduate student. In fact, a number of the examples the textbook gave as new democracies included Hungary, Poland, and Brazil. Are these still democracies? Well, according to some democracy rankings, not really anymore. So what is a democracy? The simplest definition is rule by the people, and the central idea is self-rule. In a democracy, it is the people who hold ultimate political power, not a king, military leader, or tyrant. But democracy is not simply one united idea. In the original ancient Greek form, democracy was direct. The citizens of Athens themselves gathered to debate and reach decisions on matters of common interest. The problem with direct democracy is that it is incredibly difficult on a large scale. In a small village, town, or even a small city, maybe residents would be able to regularly meet, discuss, and make decisions. But in modern countries, in India, the world's largest democracy, that has over 1 billion people. Direct democracy is simply not feasible. At a national level, all contemporary democracies are representative rather than direct. What does representative mean? Well, the original idea of self-government has changed and been replaced with the idea of elected government. How can the people said to govern themselves if they are ruled by a separate government? Well, they probably can't be. As one of my favorite philosophers, Rousseau, says, the moment a people gives itself representatives, it is no longer free. It ceases to exist. As I mentioned earlier, however, as modern countries developed, they needed new forms of government and democracy. In representative democracies, the citizens elect a parliament, and in presidential systems, a president or leader. The people cannot meet and make decisions for themselves in this system, but they can choose representatives to do it for them. A representative stands in for another person or group. For example, a lawyer represents their client. A flag represents a country. And elected politicians represent the people who elect them. Modern representative democracy allows massive populations to have some control over their leaders. Although modern democracies are representative, they are not all the same. One important distinction we need to make is between liberal and illiberal democracies. Liberal democracy is limited government. It is a version of representative democracy where the government's power is limited by the constitutional protection of individual rights, such as the freedom of religion, speech, and assembly. It is designed to protect individual rights from the power of government. This was especially important in the design of the USA's democracy. On the other hand, illiberal democracies have become increasingly common, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union. An illiberal democracy is a version of representative democracy in which rulers, although elected, govern with few limits and little respect for individual rights. Essentially, democracy does not extend far beyond the election itself. Actually, even elections in illiberal democracies are influenced by the leader's actions. So, we have looked at the definition of democracy and some different forms it can take. But how do we measure democracy and decide if a country is democratic or not? Well, there are a number of different organizations out there which do this every year. Freedom House is one example, and I recommend everyone checks out their website and compares the rankings given to different countries. On Freedom House, you can find rankings for freedom, internet freedom, and importantly for us, democracy. Their democracy score incorporates several ratings on national and local governance, electoral processes, independent media, civil society, judicial frameworks and independence, and corruption. So let me give you two examples of their ratings. The country Estonia was given 85 out of 100 and described as a consolidated democracy. Their political system is relatively stable, elections are free and fair, the media is independent, and the law is effective. However, there are some worries about corruption. On the other hand, the country Turkmenistan was given 0 out of 100, the lowest. All power in that country is in the hands of the president. The law is ineffective. There are only a few individual rights provided and protected, and the country is no way democratic. So here is today's final thought. In today's episode, we have looked at the idea of democracy. What do you think about democracy? Or maybe I should ask, what do you think about representative democracy? Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. Why do you think he said this? Can you think of any potential alternatives or solutions to the problems in your country's governments? Personally, I hope that we move away from representative democracy to what is called deliberative democracy. Deliberative democracy highlights the importance of public discussion among free and equal citizens in giving legitimacy to the decisions of government. Too often, people vote in elections and then are completely ignored until the next vote. Instead, I believe that the more people are involved and educated in the decisions of government and discussions about policy, the better government will be. What do you think? Here are today's comprehension questions. As always, the written questions and answers are available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Where did democracy start? Who is one of my favorite philosophers? Who said democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others? Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. We're now on Instagram, so please follow me on Instagram. If you have any ideas for topics, future podcast guests, or other learning formats, please let us know. Check out our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. You can see the transcripts, vocabulary lists, and lots of other content will be appearing on there in the future. And please leave us a rating. Thank you. See you next time.